But
a bit few people, but the issues we're going to talk about will be very important. And first of all, I would like to introduce or suggest to you that the topic of this session is enabling sustainable internet ecosystem. In Thai, ecosystem is similar to an environmental circumstances. In developing the internet, we have to use this system because ecosystem has, first of all, many players, many groups of players, and there are many factors involved. And so we need to understand as to what is the internet ecosystem, a complete internet ecosystem. And if in our country we don't have an internet industry when compared to developed countries. So today we are going to take a look at the formula for the creation of this system and what are the roles for each group. The panel today consists of many experts who are well qualified in many areas, beginning with the person on the far left, the lady on the far left, Kun Jane Coffin. Kun Jane Coffin is the director of Internet Society, in charge of strategy development. And she has experience in analysis and planning or strategic analysis and development of internet industry throughout the world. She has worked with international organizations as a consultant. She was also a consultant for the U.S. government. So she should be the one who is the closest to the progress of the internet industry. The second person, Dr. Rohan, who is from Linear Asia. He is in Asia. He's from Sri Lanka. He used to be a regulator in Sri Lanka. He is one of the experts who is of great interest to us, and he will tell us that in our region when we began to have telecommunication, and then it became free, and there are many steps and many phases that need to be looked at. Now we are at the internet phase, and what are the challenges for our country if we want to have internet industry taking place in our country. If you were to look at it we are going to look at this from the regulator's perspective, the ecosystem, the perspective from the ecosystem, and the next person is Kunda Wong, who is from Hong Kong with a Thai wife. He's a Thai really, and he is a specialist in this area, and we will understand more as to why we invited him to join us. Firstly, he represents the private sector, the business sector, and he will provide that business perspective, as Kun Pinda himself is a pioneer in the internet area in our region. And as for the telecommunication market in Hong Kong, in terms of the internet, Hong Kong is a market that is most state-of-the-art in terms of the development of the internet. So he will share something that will reflect the private perspective in relation to the internet. Kunrashin Stising is next. She is my boss. He is managing director of Bureau of Asia Pacific in Singapore, and he has an engineering background. Was in the field of telecommunication, but he has been in the internet circle for quite some time, and so he will have a perspective as a person who's been in this area, what are some of the good things that could come out of the internet. He will provide a perspective on the internet development and our role in this region. Next is this person everyone knows. She's a Thai lady, and she has created many good things for Thailand in terms of the internet. Professor Kanchana Sut, she herself is the founder of .th, and she has an important role in many areas, including the driving for things that will occur in Thailand in the future. So we will start a discussion. We would like it to be an informal discussion, open and close. So may I ask Kun Jane to please proceed? Go.
Thank you, Tip, for introducing our excellent and very wise panel. I'll be very brief, as we want to hear the perspectives of our colleagues. Each one will speak, and then we'll have a roundtable and take questions from all of you. I'd like to take 1 minute, though, to set the scene. The Internet Society and colleagues around the world have seen a formula for Internet development. We call it a smart Internet development, along the lines of Smart Thailand 2020. It encourages you to take a look at the human, the technical, and the governance infrastructures that help make up smart development or smart internet development. Or people. It takes trained technologists, people to run the infrastructure, to govern it, and to work together. And you'll hear from our colleagues about the importance of building those infrastructures, sustaining them, training people as Kanchana has done, and Rohan, Raj, Pindar, and the work that they've done around the world and the different technologists that they've interfaced with. And another concept that I'd like to throw out is that there's a very important theme of working with trusted colleagues, and that's something I think that Dr. Kanchana has seen for the last 25 years, of working with people to build these technologies and to help govern them. So we'll start with Dr. Kanchana, please.
Thank you, Jane. I will switch to Thai because I heard several requests that we should speak Thai in Thailand. So, okay, so maybe it's difficult for me. Thought pros in English.
อังกฤษก็เริ่มมีความคิดแบบอังกฤษ I will speak in English. This morning when I woke up, somebody called me, my telephone. Why did you spend 25 years for me to know the internet? And so I think it was a good question that I need to find an answer to today. When you look back, why did we spend 25 years so long in order to have activities that are as great as we have been doing during the past 2 days? So I want to thank the owner, the person who posed that question. I would like to say this: why is it that we spent 25 years? 25 years ago, when I talked to somebody, they would say that I was duping them, I was cheating them. I told them that we could create emails and so on. They wouldn't believe me. At first, I was feeling very bad because I had to try to convince people that we can do it. And then one day we are acting like a missionary, and so I went back to the fundamentals, that is the Buddhism, and that to accept the fact that at that time was not ripe, it was not appropriate, so whatever I would say wouldn't be useful. So I returned back and strengthen the areas that I can be strong in, and so I also at the same time try to find people who will come to help me, and we focus on education and creating networks of engineers and personnel without paying any attention as to what the outside world would say. And so I spent quite a few years in that area. And at the time, when other people woke up, so to speak, they were told, why, Professor, why are you taking over Thailand, taking over all these people and put them on your side? So this is something all the pioneers would face. And so we had to find answers and explain to them as to what happened. We need to use the internet, and so we need to create it. And from that time on, the philosophy that I have learned from that experience is that if we were to force people to accept things before the right time, we would expend our energy in the wrong way. And so finally, I tried to develop my own team, and those people who look after .th and Pinda and all these people, and I learned from them, and I created networks that would support our work. And finally, I could say that I was very proud of the team that I have developed and created, and we allowed technology to come in slowly into the country through applications. And so the community began to grow naturally, but it was kind of slowly because it was naturally growing. And so that was the answer that I could give to my friend who called me this morning. Now, one thing that is important that I saw, that I've seen during the past 25 years, is that we need to prepare personnel to accept this new technology, the internet. We have to create an ecosystem for it. We have to develop human resources. We have been talking about the past 2 days. You could see very well that the impact of the internet on our daily lives is immense, both in terms of your own social network and in terms of legal matters, crimes, commerce, and so on. So in every area we lack personnel. So every country has to develop personnel for these areas. For the network side, well, at the Thailand Internet Society, the network engineer lacks engineers, a severe shortage of engineers. How are we going to prepare for the new users? And there have been a lot of new applications, and a lot of people are using the internet. We are not going to have enough personnel to look after the basic structure of the internet or the infrastructure. So based on this meeting, after this, we will have the Thai people will have to sit down together and find ways to solve this problem. I think I will speak just briefly so that other people may have time to help us find answers for Thailand. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Rohan.
Good afternoon. An ecosystem is by definition a complex thing, so I'm not going to talk about all aspects of it. My intention is to talk about two aspects, one from the demand side and one from the supply side, that my research organization has been working on. I was fortunate enough to be in government as a regulator when the telecom boom, the voice telephony boom, occurred in our region. And during that period, we really didn't worry too much about the demand side. Demand seemed to be there. People wanted to talk. And we worried only about the supply side. But when it comes to the internet, there is a concern about whether there is a need to look at the demand side, and I will illustrate this. We do research. We do a large sample survey, 10,000 sample survey, 6 countries, 12 languages. It's called tele-use at the bottom of the pyramid. That means we don't do, the sample is not representative at the level of the country, but instead it's representative among the poor socioeconomic groups, D and E. One of the countries that we have studied over the years is Thailand. So when we do this study, we have a quantitative component and we also have a qualitative component. We ask the question, do you use the internet from these relatively poor people? And we generally get a lot of them saying, Thailand of course was the highest, but a lot of them say, no, we don't. We only use the telephone for voice telephony, or in some cases we use somebody else's telephone to make phone calls. But in the qualitative studies that we were doing, the qualitative interviews, which go on for about 2 hours, we found that people who said they don't use the internet then started talking about what they do with Facebook. Same people. So my researchers were very confused by this. And then we started talking to our colleagues in Africa who do similar studies in 12 African countries. And they went back to their quantitative data set and they found the same phenomenon and they had to go back and clean their data. So what this illustrates is that there is a huge interest in this sort of content that people create themselves in the context of social networks. Facebook and so on. In Africa, something called mixed. People, this is what is driving demand. People do not actually want to use broadband, if you think about it. Why would you want to use broadband? You want to use it to do something for yourself. You want to talk to your family, you want to see how they're doing, you want to retrieve information, you want to do various things. So we come back to a statement that I recall from my days in the US, where we used to say content is king. But then, you know, we really didn't know what to do with it. We sort of said it, but we didn't know how to operationalize it. Now we have come to a situation where content is king. So from a policy perspective, when I look at this, I like ecosystems, but you know, ecosystems have predators and bad things that can happen, earthquakes, volcanoes, all kinds of bad things could happen. So some of the bad things that could happen to this demand pull that is actually driving large numbers of our people. I was looking at my Thai numbers from 2011, we had about 27% of the people in our sample were saying they are using the internet, but actually I think it's now in 2013 must be about 30%. Two of the bad things that can happen, there are many others, but let me just point to 2. One is that there is an ongoing conversation throughout the world about how to charge for internet traffic. For traffic going from one country to another, the load that it imposes on telecommunication networks, who should pay for it, what kind of payment arrangement should be made, and some people, unfortunately, are going back to the days of monopoly telephony and thinking of some models from that period. We have analyzed it. I'm not going to go into great detail here, but in our analysis, we believe, we have concluded that this would lead to either a balkanized internet where most of these young people, the people who are coming onto the internet will not be able to get access to the information, the content they desire. Because the payment arrangements that are being proposed would result in more information being pushed behind paywalls. Because right now the basic business model doesn't rely on payments from the user. The users pay for the broadband connectivity. They pay by the byte, they pay by the time, they pay in various ways. And sometimes they pay too much, they pay more than they should be paying. But they are paying for it. But some of the telecom operators who have difficulty in upgrading their networks, which is a genuine issue, which I do agree with, they seem to think that they need to go out and charge the people who send the content to these countries for the load, as they say, the load that is imposed on their networks. Now, I believe this could stifle internet development because it would dry up quite a lot of the interesting content that is available, and that way the enormous growth that we are likely to see in internet could be affected. There's of course other issues that are floating around in our region. Right on the edge of South Asia is Iran, and there are serious attempts to create, some people call it the halal internet, some walled garden, some enclosed thing that would not be open to the rest of the world. These kinds of temptations do afflict various governments at various times, and I think this again goes against the very principles, the very attractiveness of the internet, and the beauty of it in terms of the plethora of information that is available to young people today. And I think these are things that we should consider to be bad things, hazards that are afflicting our ecosystem, and we should be on our guard against them and talk to our governments and all the people who have authority in this area to try to keep these hazards at bay. The other aspect of the problem, of course, now I'm sympathizing with the telecom operators, is that, for example, in Hong Kong, the regulator was telling me that as the smartphones came in and as large-scale data use started up, they had a 20 times increase in the data traffic on the mobile networks. Not 20%, but 20 times over a period of 24 months. This is an enormous problem from an operator's perspective. I've never been a regulator, but I've always tried to be a regulator who tries to see the problem from the perspective of those who I regulate. So I've been trying to look at the problem from their perspective. And for them, it means an enormous demand to just keep throwing additional investment, additional capacity at the problem. Otherwise, we are all going to be drowning we are all going to be affected by congestion. And as you know, sometimes even yesterday we had a little bit of that problem here. When too many of us are using the network, we are congested and our internet experience becomes rather unpleasant. And nobody wants that. Not the user, not the content providers, not the telcos. So we need to sit together and come up with solutions to address this issue of containing the problem of congestion. In some countries it has already come. I would say that for Thailand, for a lot of countries who are beginning with 3G and 4G, it is just on the way. It's like I can tell you there's a tsunami coming. And I was with the regulator yesterday and I was telling them, I don't normally predict the future, but I can predict to you that you will have congestion problems very, very quickly in this country, the way that the take-up is going. So when that happens, you need to think about the internet use, the internet value chain. And as we know, any chain is as strong as its weakest link. In some countries, the weakest link is the access network because we have not given out enough frequencies. In some countries, the weakest link is the national backbone because we do not have proper open access arrangements and certain companies are monopolizing it and not allowing the other companies to use it. In some cases, particularly in Asia, where we have done some diagnostic work, we do have a problem with international connectivity. The international backhaul in our region is quite expensive, and it is also affected by two choke points, one in the Taiwan Strait and one in Suez, which sometimes causes our networks to go down and crawl because for some reason that I won't get into detail, either an earthquake or some human factors have caused a cable or two or three to be cut And we need to address these issues because it takes time for these policies to be formulated, it takes time for the investments to be made and the cables to be laid. And our recommendation, and we are working with the UN Economic and Social Commission for the Asia Pacific, is that we need some form of mesh network that would back up the current over-reliance on submarine from the terrestrial side. So I will stop at that point, but these are the kinds of things that we need to do to make this ecosystem, I think the word is sustainable. Otherwise we would have an ecosystem that sputters and stops. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rohan. Pindar's up next, but I'd just like to recap. Dr. Kanchana has spoken about the importance of allowing a community to grow and building that engineering capacity and the human capacity in country, and the importance of those communities for the infrastructure here. Dr. Rohan, we've heard about demand and the importance of talking to the regulators and other solutions to look at the sustainability of infrastructure. And now, Pindar, we'll turn to you.
Right, thank you. So I'm actually going to talk about the money aspect on the commercial side of things, and thank you for bringing up Hong Kong. In fact, I'm going to talk about two networks. The internet network as being one of them, which is open and free access. There's another network which is not open to everyone. It's also called the financial network, which is run by, again, a group of international banks. So in terms of internet development, Kanchana brought up a very, very fundamental point, which is, what is the point of all of this? It's a very valid question, the why question. And if you look at the internet over the last 20 years, we can't really answer that because everything that seems to work out is only clear in retrospect. What we can say is that there may be certain elements in terms of the ecosystem to make it sustainable. Sustainable in terms of the capital investment you have to put in all the equipment to handle the 20-fold growth in data. Also, sustainability in terms of this, what I would call soft infrastructure, the availability of the personnel at all levels, including management. So, in terms of the internet, one of the key motivations from a commercial sense is ultimately getting a return on your investment in a financial sense. And that means that if you design and build your network, that you manage to get some revenue from it that more than compensates for the capital investment in either license fees that you have and or the physical infrastructure you put in. So one of the benefits of coming late to the party is that technology marches on, and the ability to shift bits by volume gets cheaper and cheaper. It's interesting to note from Dr. Roham's observation that this issue to do with fair settlement was in fact an issue which we faced in the internet in the mid-90s. That transition was of a different one. Similar scale, 20-fold increase, but it was really from text to images. Now with the World Wide Web, at least in Hong Kong, the internet to us in Hong Kong is relatively invisible. It's just infrastructure. It's just a utility. We have the highest burst broadband speeds in the world. I have multiple tens of megabits to my house, and I don't care. I can get 1,000 megabits if I would like, but I don't need it. Why? Because it's up to me. What do we do with this network? The interesting question in Hong Kong right now is, so what? In fact, we've built all the physical hardware infrastructure. We're done, as far as I'm concerned. The question is, what are we going to do from not only a financial perspective, but also from a societal perspective? So I'm going to deal with the finances as part of this presentation. So looking at sort of a broad brush, what I've noticed is that we're swinging from one extreme to another. In the 1970s, we have mainframes, we've gone distributed, and now we're going back to cloud computing. Okay. We've gone from fixed line to wireless, and now we've gone from hardware to software to simulated hardware in software. Okay, so that's gone from analog to digital to being virtual. So all of these are very, very interesting trends, but the stress points are very different. Both the economic stress points and also the societal stress points. And so we went from a research network which involved the homogeneous news of educators who are still educating. And the reason why they still are educating is because all the latest technologies are not written down. The textbooks haven't been written. One thing we had to do in Asia was to create a conference called the Apricot Conference, to get it from the minds of the guys who are at the bleeding edge to your mind, because it would take too long to write down. Or in fact, no one may know what the solution is. In fact, those at the bleeding edge, before Hong Kong, were trying to figure out how things worked in South Korea from an operational perspective. So the commercial guys came along in the mid-90s. I arrived on the scene 20 years ago on the commercial internet, and there was an education process involved, meeting with regulators. But that was relatively simple because you knew that, okay, international bandwidth was X, you had a relatively stable set of traffic, which was text at that point in time, and then we had this sea change. That sea change was the World Wide Web. People were downloading images. Oh my God, these images are huge. We were talking kilobits. Okay, and now in Hong Kong, as you know, we in fact have built this infrastructure that we kind of don't care. In fact, we're moving from 2D to 3D. Why? Because we have the infrastructure that can shift, literally gigabits. And we don't care because at this point the network is transparent. It's transparent over wireless or whatever. Now we're facing the real hard question that you're facing, which is what is the point of all of this? So you also recall that in the 1990s there was an internet boom. Okay, people got rich by starting and buying and trading networks and acquisitions and that kind of thing. And that was a very, very big motivator to get a company to what was then called initial public offering, to get yourself rich and then do other more interesting things. It's clear that the commercial guys also had tremendous amount of competition, and we had to get over that. One of the biggest accomplishments in Hong Kong there were many commercial operators, we all distrusted each other, we were all trying to compete on size and bandwidth, was to find someone who we hated the least to create an internet exchange point. And that became known as a Hong Kong Internet Exchange Point, built actually, it turned out, in a university. That is now critical infrastructure. So these things evolve. So we did not know in terms of at the beginning where things would end, but we did have to do one thing, which is to be incredibly flexible in our thinking. And to have business models which were equally flexible because we did not know what was coming down the pipe. Having said that, there is no substitute for outstanding engineering. And I think one of the testaments to Hong Kong is that we've managed to ride that massive explosion in mobile data with the customer not really noticing that much. And I think that's some sort of success. So getting back to the commercial side of things, the content is king argument is still very much valid today because the content that flows over these networks, irrespective if it's wireless or wireline, is someone's property. Now we call that intellectual property. And that intellectual property has taken resources to develop. So the question is, how do we monetize that? How do we get money back, revenue from that? In Hong Kong, we've developed something called intellectual property trading, which we'll get into that in a moment. But after the internet went commercial with the web, we had huge stresses with people sharing stuff that didn't belong to them in the music industry, in the film industry, what have you. That said, there was also another sea change, which the cost of developing this digital content, I remember my first high-definition video camera was multiple thousands of US. Now you and your iPhone have probably better quality than I did back then. So there's these technical changes which enables new business opportunities. The question is, who's your market? Hong Kong has a population of 7+ million. As a market in and of itself, it's relatively irrelevant. We are a great test bed. We're geographically small, incredibly concentrated, which means it's very easy to wire. It's a very different story when you're wiring a country, and that's why the Hong Kong comparison is not strictly apples to apples. So with this growth, we've also seen a phenomenal sharing in two areas. One, we found out people are willing to pay for entertainment. Okay? So that goes back to the content is king. But we also found out that who generates this content, how it's refined, recycled, is increasingly shifting from the old so-called monopoly providers to what was called user-generated content, YouTube being a great example of that. And what we found was that the legal licensing turned out to be a real problem. Why? Because when you start sharing stuff that doesn't belong to you, you get accused of all sorts of things, like copyright infringement. But the real benefit of sharing with the internet technology is so that you can make a very efficient use of scarce resources. Otherwise, you become into conflict. So what we learned from the file sharing era was that we needed a legal way to license content. Now, one would ask, what is the biggest innovation, or where does Apple get most of its revenue from? One would argue that it's iTunes. Is iTunes a technical innovation? I would argue no. It is a business process innovation. So innovation happens on all levels, including business models. And I would say that if you were to think of Hong Kong as infrastructure, you would miss the benefit of being in Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, we innovate, we fail quickly, and our objective in life is to find out what works. Not in a sort of not academic sense. And so what we're focusing right now is how to make best use and monetize the network that we've already produced. There's a phrase that you can go research, it's called intellectual property trading. These are like stock exchanges in a sense. We've got 4 exchanges that now trade intellectual property, from trademarks, patents, copyright, design rights. Those are the links right there. We've created a new journal, and similar to the commercialization of the internet service provider, I try to convene these 4 intellectual property trading companies, the commercial side, as we develop and make lots of mistakes to develop new policies in this whole era. What we've also tried and do is influence policy at the global level. Hong Kong is an individual tariff area in terms of WTO, and again, we're actively trying to participate in open fora like the Internet Governance Forum to deal with this new era of the trade of intangibles or the trade of virtual goods. Why? Because if one believes in commerce, if you look at the last 300 or 400 years, commerce was defined by the trade in physical goods. It is my personal thesis, the next 200 years, the terms of trade will be defined by the trade of virtual goods, what I call internet intangibles. We don't know how to do that, but we do know that the 2 key elements. One is taxation, how a government's going to recognize revenue. The other is the financial network that I alluded to earlier. Now, one of the things about the internet is that we get rid of the middleman. And as a trading economy, that's very odd. Right? If you get rid of the middleman, what happens to the middleman? Well, you become the new middleman, such as the search engines. When you start to do peer-to-peer, then you don't need the hierarchy. The internet collapses hierarchy. Then very strange things happen. One hierarchic system is the financial network. Again, it's not internet, but the interesting thing is there is massive innovation in financial transactions, such as Bitcoin, for example, that are now trying to do peer-to-peer virtual currencies on the internet. We don't know how that's going to work out. But from a commercial side, anything that lowers our cost of doing business is good for business. Anything that gets in the way of that, in terms of complexity mainly, is increase our costs and increase our ability to do what we do best, which is scale. So if you're trying to scale, simplicity helps. Now, as far as the sustainability of the ecosystem, again, it's a whole cycle. Using the Buddhist sort of, what comes around goes around. Can you find a closed cycle? Who produces the information? How is it refined? How is it recycled? Interesting developments in terms of copyright law are such as Creative Commons, but the key point that I think rate limits Hong Kong in the commercial sense is our ability to influence soft infrastructure. As I said, we built the hard infrastructure. We are struggling, in my view, with the soft infrastructure, which is exactly the same problem as it's always been, which is finding the right group or mix of skills. The biggest skill, I would say, in the commercial sector, in terms of executive management, in terms of finding the right kind of leaders, is the following. When you have the internet, you don't know what's true. And there's lots of stuff. It's not only a size of lots of data, it's lots of conflicting data, which tells you exactly the opposite of what you heard 10 seconds ago. So one of the things that I think we take pride in is the ability to make decisions in absence of perfect information. In fact, to make decisions when information that you have is in fact conflicting. And if business is the extension of warfare in other forms, then if you look back in terms of the great generals over the last few hundred years, that seems to be also a very important leadership character trait. So in terms of the leadership talent that you develop in Thailand, I would say the following. I would say that the old business model of basically divide and conquer is no longer relevant. I think the new business model is connect and liberate. And the key determining situation here is to find leaders who can make those difficult decisions when you've got multiple data which is all conflicting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pindar. And next up is Raj Singh, and thank you for that. We've gone from the physical training and the engineering side, the work you do on the governance and the other technical infrastructure, to a very interesting point you've made about the virtual infrastructure. And I like the point you've just made. It's connect and liberate. So interesting. And Raj?
Thanks. So I'll just pick on a few things that some of my fellow panelists have said already. I think nearly everyone's mentioned the issue of capacity building and human capital. So let's call it human capital. I've just come back from the World Economic Forum in East Asia, which was held in Myanmar over the most of this past week. And one of the questions that was being asked there is, what can the world do for Myanmar? As you all know, Myanmar's history has been pretty closed in recent times, where they've not been able to get much outside help. And I think this question that we are asking here, how do you build that ecosystem? I think a perfect example is, I would perhaps change it around to say, how can we build the ecosystem in a country which has no ecosystem to begin with? No concept of what an ecosystem is. And that's what we have in Myanmar. I mean, infrastructure is very basic. Human capital is just about non-existent. Now, so on the issue of human capital itself, Professor Kanchana talked about the technical training and, the lack of engineers, and so Pinder mentioned, executive management and management level people. But I'll also add that it's not just that. And if we're talking about an ecosystem, there's also the other bits that go with it. Including someone who can go and fix a computer, but as well who can someone lay cable, someone who can troubleshoot a satellite systems so that we have, terrestrial or space-based communications, someone who can write stuff, someone who can translate stuff. It goes to everything. At every level or every little bit of the ecosystem, we need that human capital. And sometimes I think we get a bit carried away talking about all the technical mumbo-jumbo, and we don't realize that the world is advancing very quickly. Our kids, our nieces, nephews, the next generation, they're so much far ahead of the game than we ever were. I'm by training, I'm a telecom engineer and an old school telecom engineer. So, ITU has always been king for me. Till ISOC said, no, that's not right, but that's not true. Coming from that background and suddenly realizing that the internet, and I saw the light a long time ago, mid-90s, 94. And I switched track and I started up some successful companies in the process because I made money out of the internet. So that then goes to the point that Pinder made about business models. And an interesting conversation I had in Myanmar with a university professor who runs a business school in China, and before that he ran the INSEAD school in Singapore. And what he said to me was that his biggest fear right now is that education itself, and not just technical education, but education in general, will not change with the times. And the classic example he gave was, he said, look at our old universities, what we call the top universities of the world. Most of them, according to him, were very archaic in nature. They resist change. They do not want to introduce change. They do not want to introduce technology into the classrooms. They've got a system that's been running for a while and they'd rather stay with that. But his point was that, if we don't adopt these new business models, we'll all die. Now, doesn't that sound familiar? Look at telecom companies, this whole issue about content that Rohan mentioned about, the over-the-top players being asked to pay for content. So, the key point I think here is that business models have changed, the world has changed. We cannot live in the past anymore. So, in order to support this ecosystem, we also need to change the way business models evolve and develop. I think that's a very key point. One other interesting comment that I heard in a discussion with a gentleman who's the CEO of one of the world's largest mobile companies was, he said, today people, particularly youngsters, when they go and buy a phone, they're not buying a smartphone. They're buying a device that they can use apps on. Okay, so it's not to make phone calls either. He said the amount of time they spend on voice is probably a much smaller fraction than the amount of time they spend, fiddling away with WhatsApp or Facebook or Twitter or a whole bunch of other stuff that exists. So again, that's a change. That's a change in business models issue as well. So Okay, so I'll leave it at that for the moment. The last thing I want to mention is, we're talking about an ecosystem. So giving an example of what we've actually done to see what happens when you do introduce an ecosystem into a location. In 2010, we initiated a project called Wireless for Communities in India. And what we did was look at very rural locations in India where there was no connectivity. At least no usable connectivity. I mean, you can't say there's no connectivity, because if there's a cell phone signal, there is connectivity, right? But the issue was that people in that particular location were not using the internet. They were not online. The location we chose was a place called Sanderi, which is pretty much smack bang in the middle of India. To get there took me 10 hours using a combination of rail, ox cart, and train. And a car, and then we had to walk the last couple of, 100 meters to get to where we wanted to go. But the thing was, so we set up a pilot project, and the first thing we did was actually train people in the community to run the wireless network. So we did not install a wireless network, we didn't do anything else first. First thing, let's get the technical people in place. The second thing we did was run a community workshop to train people on how to use the internet. Then we actually deployed the network, and it's a community-based Wi-Fi system that covers the whole valley area. It's been, in October it'll be 3 years, so I went down myself, and then I got up and rigged towers myself, because I hadn't done that for so long, so it felt good. Then I suddenly realized, what the hell am I doing here, But it sort of brought back the good old days when I used to go and build stuff, but anyway. And the thing is, so in October it'll be 3 years since we installed that, and we're looking at doing a study now to do a baseline on what's actually happened. Last year the IEEE asked me to write an article on what have you actually achieved with that project, and I did that. And what's evolved in just the 2 years since we've deployed that, the whole area has completely changed. There are 13 schools in that area, all of them are wired up to the internet now. Once we had the network in place and teachers who knew what technology was and were able to teach technology, other funding donors came and said, okay, we'll start distributing laptops and tablets to these kids now. So the government gave some private sector companies gave some. And suddenly, so I saw the project as a catalyst for enabling so many other things. As well, there was a health center that's in that location, which had this telemedicine equipment donated some years back. For 2 years, it had sat under a blanket covered nicely to keep it safe from dust. Why? Because there was no connectivity. Our network was able to connect them up, and now every day 30 to 40 patients get referred to the district headquarters hospital for specialists. The alternative to that was to travel into Delhi or to some other close by big city to go and get these diagnoses done. But now it's been actually done locally. So, and the reason I'm giving you that example on telemedicine, education, capacity building, because that's what, all little bits that make up the ecosystem. And there's much more than that. I mean, we can talk hours on this, right? So, I'll head back to Jane now. And
I'm going to ask a couple questions of our panel, but before we head into that, is there anyone in the audience that has a preliminary question they'd like to ask? Anything?
There's a question here.
Okay. Question?
Well, I've just got a piece of paper that says NOGs.
Network operator groups.
So
Perhaps
is there a question around that, or?
Talk about NOGs.
I want to talk about it. There isn't, in this region, as Raj, you probably know that there isn't much of network of operators, in this region. Thailand doesn't have one either, and I know we do work in NOGs, and there's been a lot of discussions within the community of the internet that one of the things that we've done in other countries, like for instance Malaysia, is to help them form NOGs, and how does NOG fit into the ecosystem? Just at a meeting in Macedonia where a network operator group was formulated with colleagues. I would like to point out that there is a gentleman sitting in the back of this room, Philip Smith from APNIC, who is, I would call, the father of the network operator groups. This goes back to the first point I was making about people, the importance of trusted human interaction. And one thing that I think we found over the last 20-something years, and Dr. Kanchana, we can turn to you in a minute on this, because you were one of a person that was trained years ago through some of the INET and developing country working group meetings, I think, with Lucy. No? Well, the important thing is, when you have the technical community coming together and people working with each other and training each other, there's a common language, and people are less afraid to ask questions of each other in those engineering groups. And I think, Pinder, you and Raj have participated in the regional groups.
Sure. Just wanted to build on the question about NOGs. I mean, you want to ask the question of why would competing network operators who are trying to kill each other in the commercial marketplace agree to meet? I mean, that sounds insane. But until you realize that the internet, you have to do that, because you have to get your network that you're building to interoperate with someone else's network and someone else's network. So the interesting thing is that the internet forces you to find ways to interoperate, not just passing bits, but also at multiple levels. This is actually not just the network operating level, but perhaps also, one would argue, at the commercial level. And the reason being is that what has so far saved the internet, and I'm not sure, well, maybe for mobile will save the internet too, what has helped is you're not fighting to get a bigger slice of a small pie. You're trying to make as big a slice of a pie that's growing faster than anyone can possibly imagine. And so far it's worked. It's not to say that it will work forever, because this growth, as I said, in Hong Kong, we're kind of snobbish now. We don't, you tell me I want 1,000 megabits, I couldn't really care, because I want to do what I want to do. And so there may be a point, and I don't know if that point, where something will pivot. Something will fundamentally change. And going back to these network operator groups, I think it's very helpful to know if there's a sense within the room of when those pivots occurred or when they're coming. For example, the IPv4, IPv6 pivot.
So I would point back to one of the slides that Pinder had about sharing and not fighting. So I think that could be one perhaps motivation to do that. We actually have quite a few NOG operating in the region. South Asia NOG is very successful, running for the South Asia region. There's the Pacific NOG and the Pacific Islands, both of which Philip, of course, is involved with. Then there's Apricot, which is not really a NOG, but it brings together people in a very similar sort of fashion to exchange ideas and train each other. And again, Philip is heavily involved with that. Philip, would you like to say something on NOGs? Just to put you on the spot there, mate.
Okay, is this microphone? Yes. Yes, I mean, the main function of the network operations groupings, as you've all been saying, is really to bring the competing operators together. So generally, Apricot I consider the biggest of them all, and as you said, it's not really a NOG, but within that you have a network operations community meeting. Now, Apricot being the big thing that it is, it's coming here next year, by the way, February, so make a note in your diary. But because it's trying to get around 57 economies in the Asia-Pacific region, it can't turn up every year in every single country. So that was the motivation for founding SANOG. It was the motivation for founding PACNOG for South Asia and for the Pacific Island region. We couldn't take something the scale of Apricot really into the Pacific, and trying to bring something the scale of Apricot into South Asia works in India, but probably not so well anywhere else. And again, the travel for these operators to come to somewhere else in the region is fairly prohibitive. We've got quite a lot of developing countries and least developing countries in this region. So the emphasis is always to try and have the local network operators work together for whatever definition of local. Now, South Asia could be local, but for example, there is no network operations community here in Thailand, as we've mentioned. I first came here in 1998, and I said exactly the same thing. Why is there no network operations group? We have the network operators. It was quite interesting doing a workshop, actually, here. The network operators would come into the room. There's not much conversation with each other, even. everybody sits huddled together by themselves. And that's quite unusual in this internet. In this internet, the competing operators want to work together because they want to make the internet better for everybody. And that's really the motivation. And some of the places around the world, we don't quite see that same desire to happen. So it's dear to Professor Kanchana's heart, it's dear to my heart to try and encourage the greater collaboration of the operators for whatever definition of local.
Professor Kanchana, can you give us some more insight?
Yes, very good point. I think the divisiveness among the Thai operators was rooted in telco's time. And most of the operators nowadays came from that industry. So there, this kind of mistrust and, not going beyond their boundary is a big problem in this country.
Just to build on that, and this is the one reason why what I mentioned before about, I guess, governing philosophies in business have changed. I mean, in the previous era, this whole concept of divide and conquer makes complete sense. You divide the opposition. If you've got more resources, you starve them out, or what have you. And that's all well known, and we've done that for several hundred years. But this game is different.
It's very hard to convince them.
Yes, it is very hard.
Very hard to convince them and the boss,
Understand. And that's why I go back to what I would actually say is my personal credo, which is connect and liberate. Ultimately here, you have to recalibrate what your priority is in terms of how do you define win. Because in business, you're about being number one in winning. What is that? How is that? Now, businesses, for-profit businesses, do not have any other objective than to make profit, right? It's not a social enterprise. There are those, but for-profit businesses are in the nature of running businesses. So the question is really to think about what business you're in. Are you really there in terms of a network operator supplying broadband, or are you really, is your competitor yourself, or do you also run a mobile network and you make money from handsets? I don't know. I mean, these are individual decisions. But what we do know is that the rate of innovation and your ability to evolve is almost constant. And you may be fighting look at the room. The number of laptops in this room is dying. Why? Because probably people have smartphones. Now in Hong Kong, I consciously use a 2G phone and a 6-year-old laptop. Why? And I supposedly do policy there. It's because I need to keep myself mentally sharp by living on the other side of the digital divide. The reason being is I believe the innovation, the true innovation, such as what I saw this morning at the farming group, is actually happening in the margins. It's happening in the rural areas. Thailand is an agricultural superpower. The whole world has an interest to see how Thailand uses internet technology to improve efficiencies and sustainability in its farming ecosystem. We don't grow physical stuff, Hong Kong's a city, it's all concrete. So how do we feed the next billion is perhaps a more important question than to get the next billion online. And I see Thailand's role in that is in asking and answering questions in areas you're already good at. Hong Kong, it's a difference. So that's the other thing that's one is very reluctant to do is to say, well, this worked here, therefore you should do it. Everywhere, we found out everywhere is different. It has a different political climate, cultural climate, technical capability, what have you. And so you can't be prescriptive. But what you can say is that the innovation will kill you unless you get ahead of it. So you might as well invent it, because then you have some degree, a very little degree of control. But that's really precious when you're dealing in a rapidly changing area.
And Dr. Kanchana, what would your advice be to the policymakers and regulators right now, if we know, as all the panelists have said, we've heard from Philip, there's an importance in bringing people together that do compete. Thailand has the ability to move forward, as you mentioned, the Smart Farming Initiative. We spoke about it yesterday. It was fascinating to hear about. What would your advice be to officials to help push some of this forward? Because as Pinder's saying, there's a tipping point or a pivot.
Right. how to make people who don't talk to one another to come in the same room and cooperate. It took me many years to succeed in one case. That was the split between two Thai research in education network. It took me almost 10 years to make them talk to one another, and that happened because there was an outside external pressure because of the Trans-Eurasia network for research education network that want to connect just to a single network. Okay, so I think for the Thai case, it's very difficult. I don't know how to change people, the way people think. I don't know how to get rid of the very old concept of business model, and many of the people in the industry still, think that they have to grab hold of the internet. There is one big company right now that want to get everything, and this is going on in my country. And if you have any advice to help me to change that, that would be great. I would be grateful. Well, I succeeded in the research and education network, but I don't think the same model can be applied to the industry. And Philip is my friend who helped me in trying to get them together, and so far we have not succeeded.
I think you've succeeded immensely, and you've got that power to try and bring people together, and I feel like there is a push that what's the tipping point from your perspective, Dr. Rohan? Because we know there's been a successful formula for bringing people together in the IXP model, the Internet Exchange Point.
Many ISPs, smaller ISPs. Morakot is the Deputy Chairman of the ISP Association. Maybe you can say a few words on that. Is there any collaboration? Yes.
But Rohan, from your perspective, you've been a regulator, you've worked with other governments. What would you suggest? Bringing people together that don't want to sit in the same room.
Well, one of the things that Pindar talked about, which is it's easier to do it when the pie is expanding. That is, I think, critically important for people to understand that. The second issue, of course, is that I used to tell my colleagues, the people I was regulating, even in telecommunications, is that this is, while we talk the language of competition, many phone companies are incapable of completing the service, the calls that their customers want without interconnection. And of course, in our region, regulators have had incredible problems with interconnection, with the large companies refusing to give interconnection, denying interconnection, causing quality problems, you name it. We've had them all. I mean, I spent a lot of time in Bangladesh. For the longest time, Bangladesh, you couldn't call from a mobile phone into the fixed network for years on end, until the fixed company became irrelevant, because all the growth happened without them. So these are, so you can preach all these things, as Dr. Kanchana was saying. You can say these things, but people still don't cooperate. My sense is that if you can improve their existence, if you can reduce their transaction costs, if you can show them some concrete benefit, then you are more likely to have success. But then on the other hand, some of the countries that I work in, we have mobile operator associations. In the other countries, there aren't these associations. And that may be a cultural feature, that may be something the regulator is happy about, because it reduces the opportunities for collusion when they don't have formal organizations. So this is a mixed issue, and I don't think At least I don't have any answers.
Well, it is a local issue, obviously. There's lots of experience in this region through ASEAN, APEC, the work we've been doing at the Internet Society, all of the great experience you have, Pindar. And we've got the layers of growth in different countries. Is it almost, do you have to provide examples and say country X did Y in this region, you should do it too? I mean, Raj, you were just in Myanmar. Are you worried about sustainability there moving too quickly? Are they going to leap?
So one of the sessions that I was a part of was called Making Quantum Leaps with Technology. And I've actually written a report about that, so it should be out soon. And the question was, so I looked at the policy aspects as well as infrastructure aspects. Obviously, the great opportunity Myanmar has, just to answer your question, is that because the basic infrastructure is so low, they don't need to go 2G, 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G. You can go to 4G. They don't need to go with IPv4. They can go with IPv6. They don't need to invest in legacy systems. And that's the thing I kept on emphasizing, that, don't invest in the past, invest in the future. However, the issue, of course, is, you always have commercial interests. The vendors will make a sales pitch. And that's what I was up against. So, that's always going to be an issue. The Asia-Pacific region is very, very diverse. Sometimes even within a country we have so much diversity, forget about between countries. So, it makes it even harder to have a boilerplate example. In some countries you may be able to do something in the west part, but in the east part you've got to do something completely different because, the whole system and culture is different. The incentive to collaborate is different. Some will look for profit, some will look for something else. So, I don't think there's any one clear answer. One answer maybe is to use a very big stick, but the question is who wields that stick. Right.
And Pindar?
Just to go on that, the stick argument again. That human sort of beings, there's two spectrums that drive them, right? One is fear, the stick, and the other one is greed. And somewhere in between, in Hong Kong we use both. Greed seems to work in terms of the financial side. But I want to distinguish again, going back to an earlier point about why I live on the other side of the digital divide in Hong Kong, because everyone I see in policy circles finds that odd and they make fun of me, and that's fine. But I see entrepreneurs in Hong Kong in two classes: the entrepreneurs who want to be entrepreneurs because they love the chase, the thrill, the opportunity of taking risk. And the entrepreneurs who have to be entrepreneurs because they have no other choice. Okay, so they're there by need. And the difference here in the 1970s was a lot of the entrepreneurs that you read about, these the people who've done very well, moved from plastic injection flour molding down to real estate, etc., were entrepreneurs by need. They were not necessarily wanting to be entrepreneurs. The problem with Hong Kong is that we've now very comfortable. And we find that the people who want to be entrepreneurs, they want to be professionals. They want to take the desk job. And we're actually having a whole group of people who don't want to take that risk. And again, in a very rapidly changing era, why did Taobao, for example, which happened in China and not in Hong Kong? Hong Kong is on the other side of the Great Firewall of China, and that has its drawbacks. You don't have the Chinese opportunity, but it also has its benefits in terms of free flow of information. And I was speaking on that just before coming here. But going back to what might drive people is to recognize that if you're just looking within their own country, I call it getting in your own way. Because running, we seem to be talking as if we are running networks, and yes, that is the old model, perhaps 15, 20 years ago. Yes, we were network operators. But the commercial discussion now is, who cares? Get your network going, shuffle, get it done at the lowest price per bit, and focus on where the real money is. Let me give you an example. The biggest transition technology that I think may affect the low-cost manufacturing model, which is primarily used in Asia, right? Cheap labor, I think it's what it's called, okay? Is additive manufacturing, right? Instead of just shipping low-cost, cheap and nasty goods somewhere, other than Asia, people are now printing the stuff out on the other side. High-value, tailor-made, bespoke things. So 3D printing, additive manufacturing, coupled with 3D scanning. Okay, fortunately, Hong Kong, we have that network that can shovel 3D data. Look at where we're landing. We're landing and saying, look, all of this other stuff, the high value stuff, is going to be in the intellectual property. How are you going to trade that? We're a little city of traders, right? So buy low, sell high. We're good at that. But how do we do that in creating new markets, right? Creating a level playing field where we're trying to grow this playing field as fast as possible. At some point, there will be two pivots, okay? I guarantee you, as best I can. One, China will become, from a net importer of IP, to pivot and become a net exporter. I don't know when that's going to occur, but it will occur. At which point, China, which has a different legal system, it's civil law, not common law, may need a place to export its IP to common law economies. Hong Kong is based on common law economy. Common law. So there may be a role, instead of a window into China, as being a bridge from China. So if you start to look at the global marketplace as really the marketplace that you really want to try and win, in other words, you look beyond your national borders, then you quickly realize that we're actually fighting the crumbs on a very small table when the banquet dinner's over there. So there's a saying that, you always fight to win the last war. Okay, it's irrelevant. You have to position yourself to fight the next one. And the purpose of entrepreneurs and the purpose of risk-taking is not to be prescriptive. It is that each of the entrepreneurs, their value add is how they see the world. And I know I see the world differently. Now, half the time, most people do not know what on earth I'm talking about, including my wife. And I'm not saying I'm right, I'm just saying the viewpoint is different. And if you can bring these different viewpoints out, in other words, your entrepreneurial community, your private investment, your VC community, your angel community, around a network, and not necessarily try and over-constrain it. You don't know where things are going to happen. One day they're your competitor, next thing they buy you, okay? So these things are very, very fluid. And so I don't know the answer. I do know that if you bring people together and if you can increase the trust over time, you recognize that you're probably having the wrong kind of discussion.
Yeah, you've just hit on one of the most important aspects that we found often in this internet development ecosystem is that trust, those trust networks and building those networks of trust. And I think perhaps now in Thailand, where you have the Smart Thailand 2020 initiative, there's a key opportunity to try and bring more people together. And as we've all seen, it's bringing the policymakers and the regulators and the technologists together to have the conversations so that you can start moving quickly. And I think that's where we can hopefully see the pivot here, taking advantage of the different expertise around the region. But as you've said, Dr. Kanchana, it's important. You've held on so long. For 25 years, you've been doing work here, and you've let it come up organically. But the wonderful thing is you've got that bedrock, that infrastructure of the people, and very soon they're going to be coming back to you and saying, what do we do now? And I think you've hit it. We've got to bring people together that don't necessarily want to, because the internet infrastructure brings economic sustainability and growth. That is so important. Important for this country where you can innovate and do what's important in Thailand. Raj, you've just been in Myanmar. Rohan, you've been all over the map here, talking to people, and Pindar. Any last quick thoughts? Each about a minute before we close. What's your last parting comment?
I think we are facing, I think more of our people are going to come online in large numbers, not necessarily the educated people, not necessarily those in the universities. We're just going to get masses of people coming online. We are going to have a congestion problem. I think we'll have to work collectively, because it's not in anybody's interest to have people come onto the internet and be frustrated because they are waiting for something to load for 5 minutes. So I think it's a problem that will require the participation of. It'll require the cooperation of the telephone operators, who definitely are not in this area. They will be critically important. I don't think that the over-the-top players appreciate their content not loading. I think they are doing things, investing in cable, bringing their content closer to the users in Asia. I think all these groups should find a common language to talk, because we have a problem coming our way, and we cannot solve it by one group alone.
So the technical infrastructure in order to develop needs these players to come together. Pindar.
I would say, look at the software infrastructure, find ways to make connection and liberate the talent that you already have. Connect and liberate.
Connect and liberate. Raj.
So just going back to an earlier question that you asked, how can we bring about this change? How can we bring people together? I think it's also a generational thing. Once what I call the legacy telecom management is gone, the next generation, will make changes because they have a different mindset. I know people junior to me who passed out after me, they have a different mindset to what I had. That's one. Number two, I'd just like to say that, what the internet has achieved in the past 20-something years has been incredible. The fact is, the people who built it had no idea what it was going to do.
Right.
It's only in and I think Pinda mentioned that in retrospect you realize, oh, okay, this happened. So I think it's very critical right here today, at this point in time, that whatever policy and regulatory decisions we make, ensure that the internet keeps to be, it continues to be open, accessible, and we allow it to grow.
And innovate. Yeah.
And innovate.
Kanchana.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Jen, for mentioning the volcano. And I think my volcanic approach is about to work. Well, yes, quoting one example. Yesterday, I went to the Prime Minister's office, and there were an army of photographers in that office. And one of my colleagues kind of joined them, walking through them, and they were talking about, they was trying to photograph Steve Corker, and they were saying, oh, this guy, who's that guy, and this type of thing. And then they said, oh, we should ask him why